東の凸国より海を渡りて現れり、若者姫七から未だ知らず、かの身滅ぼすことも、かの願い叶えしことも、そのもの勇み立つとき我を求めん、共に荒れ野の道を行かん、待ちて願え、開口は我の古よりの定めなり、地より現れし竜が黒雲をいざない、天を覆うも、舞よりし鳳凰、その翼によりて四風を生むがごとく、漆黒の世は広がりしも、明星は一つ産卵と輝く。
Hello everyone, and welcome to my review of Shenmue II for the Sega Dreamcast and eventually for the original Xbox. If you haven't watched parts 1 and 2 of my review of Shenmue, I urge you to go ahead and do that before watching this one, because I feel like a lot of what I talked about in those two reviews, a lot about the spirit of Shenmue, carries over into Shenmue 2. A lot of the ideas of the pacing and the focus and the way Shenmue presents its story and its world is very similar to the first game and really just kind of carries over, as Shenmue 2 is, in a way, more of just the second part of a single story than a true sequel. It's something where I feel like going into that same exact detail, talking about those exact same points, would make this review a little bit overly long and a little redundant, especially for people who checked it out. And I kind of think of these three reviews as a trilogy in a way, leading up to a fourth part eventually talking about Shenmue 3 when that's finally released. Getting into the real meat of my experience with Shenmue 2, I originally didn't know that Shenmue 2 existed when I had my Dreamcast. I got it after the system had already somewhat failed, and I lived in North America where we didn't get the original Dreamcast version of Shenmue 2. Instead, several years later, we got the original Xbox version. And this is actually the sole reason why I picked up an original Xbox to begin with. It was a console I didn't have a whole lot of interest in. I played Halo and a couple other things at a friend's house, and it just wasn't something I was into. And then I saw Shenmue 2, picked it up, bought the system specifically for Shenmue, and eventually ended up picking up some other games, especially Sega stuff. And I think that little story of how I got my original Xbox shows the power of what Shenmue was to me, how much it influenced me to the point where I was willing to purchase a system solely for Shenmue 2. And years later, I had no intention of buying a PS4. Every generation I seem to have a little bit less interest in the number of games that I want to purchase. My collection is definitely going to be a lot smaller for Gen 7. I really wasn't going to get into Gen 8 besides a few kind of must-have Wii U games like Xenoblade. But the announcement of Shenmue 3 is making me buy a PS4. It's just that power of Shenmue within my life to really be invested in that story so much that it doesn't matter what the cost is to me. In a way, I want to be a part of that. I want to continue that journey. And to me, that really blossomed more in my experience with Shenmue 2, particularly when I was able to get my hands on the Japanese Dreamcast version. I'm really enjoying this one much more, and in a part that is because it is really a Dreamcast game. It is a game where I feel that experience is more whole if you can play both games on the Dreamcast on the same system. And there are a few things missing that transition. For North America, like I said, we only got the Xbox version. They imported the Dreamcast version from the PAL region. And part of that was, if you have Shenmue on two different systems, you don't get some of the little things that make Shenmue great, and Shenmue is really all about those little things. You don't get to carry over your save files, so a lot of, it depends on what time of year you finish the first Shenmue, that affects when you start off in Shenmue 2, instead of just being a set time if you don't have a previous save file, having your capsule toy collection carry over, having things like, depending on what picture you have with Nozomi, that's the picture you have in Shenmue 2. All these little things that sound like they're not really important, but they are important just because the little things are what make Shenmue great in so many ways. A lot of Shenmue 2 is in a way similar to Shenmue, just bigger. It's a grander scope than the first game, and it has the exact same problems. It's one of the odd things where in this new grand scale it could have introduced far more issues by trying to do too much. But in fact it really doesn't. My only complaints with the game are the same as my complaints with the first Shenmue, where eating is something that was overlooked. It should have been something that was a part in this, engrossing experience that went into so much detail that it seems an odd thing to leave out. Definitely a little bit of slowdown or pop in certain heavily populated areas, but it wasn't more of a problem in Shenmue II when I thought it would be more of a problem, considering the areas were more populated and bigger. It didn't feel like it was more present in a way. So really those same issues are the only issues within Shenmue II, and in a way, I noticed them less. As far as the eating, even though the world is so much bigger in Shenmue II, it feels like the occasions to eat are smaller, simply because the world is so much bigger that the number of places where you could obtain food are a smaller percentage of the places where you can go, so it doesn't seem like as much of a problem. Again, the issue of a little bit of pop-in or slowdown is as frequent, but it doesn't seem like as much of a problem just because it feels so much more understandable in a way, given the scope. And the issues of the pacing of the story for some people, something where a lot of people aren't able to get into Shenmue due to that very slow, methodical pacing of the game. Shenmue 2 has that, but at the same time, you have more action off the bat. There's more to do that is a little bit more interactive, I feel like, in Shenmue 2, where I feel like people will perhaps not feel quite as dissociated, disjointed from the experience of the game. They can really get into it more, even if not into that slower pace. One thing that Shenmue 2 does much better than the first Shenmue, I feel like, is really getting you involved in its world, getting you to really feel Ryosuke's experience, because in the first game, you're in familiar territory for him. You're getting into this very comfortable zone where you're putting yourself into his life, but the character's already aware of his surroundings. He already knows these people. He's already at an intimate level with his surroundings, and you're not there yet. You're growing with him. You're becoming involved to the point where it becomes an intimate setting for you. Whereas Shenmue 2, you're going in completely new. You're going into this strange place. You're going into this complete new experience, and so is the main character. Ryo really seems like a stranger in a strange land. His money is stolen from him very, very early in the game, the opening minutes really, and you're left alone and penniless in this strange world. And I feel like that made me connect so much more with the character because I was experiencing that same thing. It wasn't a disconnect between how the character viewed this environment, what his connection was to his surroundings. My connections were the same as his, and that got me so much more involved in the character, and it felt so much more personal. And one thing that some people complain about with Shenmue 2 is the difficulty in the opening hours of obtaining money. You spend a ton of time trying to get money to progress, trying to do all kinds of different things. In the beginning it seems almost overwhelming, where you have to spend so much extra time doing anything to get further, because finding these pieces to the puzzle, walking around these huge environments, it seems so vast and almost overwhelming. And I think that is actually to the game's benefit. I like that in the beginning it is incredibly overwhelming, because that's what the character would feel like when you first come onto, like, Aberdeen in the harbor, when you go through Wan Chai. Shenmue II's environments are massive, and in a way that's different than a lot of other open world games, where if you look at something like a lot of the Elder Scrolls games, they're incredibly massive, but they don't feel overwhelming to me, because so much of the size comes from endless landscapes. Shenmue II takes that idea and puts it in a more enclosed area where, yes, it's big, but the sort of massive feeling, that overwhelming feeling of there being almost too much, comes in a smaller, more compact area. There's just so much in every block of the streets. There's so many little signs to look at, so many stores to go into, so many people to talk to, and it's a constantly moving world. From the time that he wakes up to the time you go back to bed, you are in this world that's constantly moving and changing and feels alive, and there's so much to look at that I think the game kind of forcing you in this place where you are so lost and broke and just trying to find your way through this world, forces you to experience more of it in a way that made me enjoy it more. It made me really get more involved, and it's to the thing where I like the world in Shenmue and I enjoy being a part of it. But Shenmue II is a place where, in a way, I'd almost like to live there. In a way, it really feels just so much more personal. It feels so much more creative. It's a great way of taking this basis of reality, of these real places in and around Hong Kong, and putting them together into a more compact, smaller scale to really give you kind of the whole experience of late 80s Hong Kong in a more compact form that is actually doable. It's a feasible place to exist in. It's this interesting mesh of culture, of Western culture and Chinese culture and Japanese culture, that's fascinating, and going through just all the different districts that you have to go through, and finding the different just aspects of them culturally, finding the different shopping districts. The districts are a little bit poorer towards Aberdeen, going into Wan Chai, I love going up to like the Scarlet Hills and going into like just one of the most beautiful temples, going to Manmo Temple and everything, finding just all these fascinating characters and worlds that have collided in this colossal just cultural exchange that is so much fun to be a part of. It's something where, even beyond the beautiful story, it's just an interesting experience in those opening hours.
最賃外の地図か。後で使えるな。文部病。すいません。何か用か。
And it really adds a ton of characters. Shenmue, the first game, is a lot about characters who exist more in that moment, in Ryo's sort of formative stage where he's deciding who he is, what path he's going to devote himself to, what he's going to become. These are the people that help him form that ideology and form that identity, and then he goes out to find people that already have that, and he's now sort of defined himself, and now he is taking that defined self into a complete strange area and exploring that with lots of interesting characters. To me, Shenmue II introduces the best characters in Shenmue, and it really puts Ryo in some interesting spots where he's completely lost and struggling, and there's so much more. It's a more dynamic game in a lot of ways. I feel like the QuickTime events are better. A lot of them involve more interesting chase scenes. You even have, not to spoil anything, a point later in the game where you are handcuffed to another character and you have to sort of time your movements jumping over things as you're trying to escape, going around corners and stuff. And it's an interesting way where in Shenmue, a lot of times when you would fail a QuickTime event, you would just kind of do it over. And it's like that in a way with Shenmue 2, but there are more issues where, say you don't catch someone in a chase scene, you've now kind of lost them, and you have to re-find them in the city and repeat the scene instead of just kind of starting it over right away. And when you are handcuffed to that individual at later points, it's almost fun in a way to fail a couple times because it's handled so humorously and it's done so well. And Shenmue 2 really, what it does is it takes Shenmue and everything that was great about it, doesn't change it, just improves it, makes it a little bit better, makes it a little bit bigger, makes things on this grander scale, it makes it feel like this huge open world, and I really, really enjoyed that. And it's just the perfect environment for me. And then you go to Kowloon Walled City, which is, to me, one of the most fascinating places in the world that's not around anymore, but it's just an interesting thing where the game, in its opening hours in sort of the Wan Chai district of Hong Kong and the small surrounding areas, in itself is already just this amazing world that has only been equaled by some of the greatest games ever made. And then you go beyond that in the same game, and then even after that you leave sort of this more urban, industrialized area, and you go out into the wilderness, into the mountains, and it becomes this mystical experience that is just some of the most beautiful parts of gaming to me ever. I mean, there are certain parts of the world of Shenmue 2 that I feel have not been equaled yet, and that's just a fascinating thing. It's an incredible thing for a game to do that. It's a game where the only complaints I have are just so minor. I mean, something where moving boxes in the harbor isn't quite as interesting of a job as doing the forklift, but it's also not as big of a part of the game. It's something that's fairly optional. Besides doing it the first few times for some extra money, it's just a little aside thing versus a major part of the game. There's just so much more to do, so much more to see. It's a game where I could spend, and on that first disc, really, on the Dreamcast version, just almost an endless amount of time just living in it and exploring in it. I mean, you could easily put 20 hours into that first part just trying to do everything. It has so many more mini-games to do, from just going to a bar, putting your favorite song in a karaoke machine, and playing darts.
これを聞くか。
You can go to all these different street stands and do all these fantastic mini games, try and earn some money, go and gamble, do arm wrestling.
頼んでない。
言ってる。ファイトの掛け声で開始だ。じゃあ行くぜ。レディー。ファイト。
Try and earn some new figurines for your capsule collection. You can get a part-time job. You can do all these things, and you feel so much more involved in the world. Shenmue 2 to me feels more hands-on with the story than Shenmue. It feels like you are taking a more of a hands-on approach to the actual world around you. Instead of really enjoying living in it, you are kind of finding your way in it a little more. Your way has not already been found. It's just a wonderful experience, crazy amounts of just wonderful, memorable characters, more memorable characters than most games I've ever played. It's a wonderful experience. There's very little wrong with Shenmue II. I mean, it's one of my top 5 games of all time, and I just can't express how deeply gratifying this story is as it's going on. It just keeps building and building and becoming this bigger and bigger picture. It has everything you want, everything from romance, everything from something that seems almost horrifying. There's a huge amounts of mystery and action, and it feels so alive. It feels so grand and big. It takes what was a small scale and just explodes it into this just wonderful masterpiece that is almost untouchable in so many ways. It's a fantastic game. It's a near perfect experience. It's something everyone should try out. Definitely, to me, I feel that there is a mixed issue with this one in particular with the idea of the voiceovers. That's one thing that is a bit of a problem. The PAL region got a great deal where they got the Dreamcast version in full Japanese with English subtitles, which is definitely the way to go. If you're into the whole nostalgia factor with the voiceovers, which I kind of like, but it's really odd that they didn't also include the option for the Japanese voices. I mean, even if they had to put it on a second disc, it's very odd that they didn't include that audio option. And the Shenmue Digest, which in the Xbox version is Shenmue the Movie feature-length DVD, it's just a bunch of scenes from the first Shenmue kind of coupled together, and it doesn't really create a movie the way they talk about it. It's something where it is great to refresh your memory if you just played Shenmue 1 and haven't played it in a while, but if you've never played Shenmue 1, I don't think that watching that really gives you a great picture. It is somewhat confusing and disjointed, and it really is not a substitute for playing the first game. So if you haven't, definitely play Shenmue 1 before Shenmue 2, not only to give you a better picture, but I feel like Shenmue is a necessary foundation for what Shenmue 2 creates and expands upon, and I think you need that to really appreciate it. Shenmue 2, to me, is by far the better game. It takes everything that it was Shenmue and just makes it better. Wonderful experience. Check it out in whatever form you can, on the Dreamcast with Japanese version or the PAL version, or on the Xbox with the North American version. It's a wonderful game. It is one of the best experiences I've ever had with a game. It's absolutely incredible.